recording. We'll see. There we go.
Starting recording now. If anyone has, if we have anyone comment, let us know. Otherwise, public comment is welcome, but otherwise, once we start, commissioners only will speak. And we'll do a rapid fire round robin of who everyone is. And we're starting with Kevin because he's distracted.
Okay, I'm Kevin Vincent. I'm a member of C2E2 for a long time.
Katie Thompson, member of C2E2.
Helen Haas, student member of C2E2.
Elizabeth. Kim Paxton, JBG Smith Properties.
So we'll give you a more gracious introduction shortly.
Jenna Peabody, Air Team, Arlington County.
Joe McIntyre's C2E2 commissioner.
Doug Snow and Boss, C2E2.
Cindy Lewin, C2E2 commissioner.
Jennifer Fioretti, Assistant County Manager, Climate Policy.
Okay, and on the screen, Rich, I'll call on you.
Great. Thank you so much, Cindy. Rich Dooley, Director of Climate Policy in the Climate Policy Office. Thanks.
You and Jamie, I'm just going the order I see people.
This is Jamie Kern. I'm on the Energy Committee under the C2E2.
Great, thank you. And John Bloom.
John Bloom, public, representing the Sierra Club's Potomac River Group.
Great, thank you, John. And Rob, calling in from vacation.
Yeah, hi. Rob Sandoli, Commissioner on C2E2 and on the Energy Committee also. Thanks, over.
Thank you, Rob. And Kasha Moment.
Hi, everyone. My name is Gushef. I work in sustainable procurement, and I'm just here to learn more about what C2E2 does.
Great, welcome. And then the last, I see a phone number, 954-529, set. Anyone who would like to introduce?
Hi, Cindy. Hi, Cindy. That's Henry Perillo, Commissioner. Sorry,
Okay.
I'm calling in only right now, also on vacation.
Okay, yes, July is hard. We don't meet in August for this reason, but July is already skating by. So, introductions and Susan Cunningham is planning, the county board member is planning to join us, and when she does, we'll give her a few minutes to welcome us. Until she does, let's go ahead and start with our wonderful speaker, Kim Paxton, who is Senior Vice President for JBG Smith in Sustainability, and has also worked for HIT Construction for 10 years as in working on sustainable construction. So what we're, especially after the One Roslyn recent discussion that we've been having, understanding what is possible, what isn't possible, what makes sense for developers, what are the financial pressures. No pressure, Kim, just cover all of that. Yeah. And you have a master's in architecture, and you're very well known in the community and won 1 million awards. So we're very excited, and thanks to Doug for arranging for you to be here. We're very excited to have you. So with that, on the off chance that your PowerPoint has made its way to Jenna, I've sent it twice.
Has it been saved in any of the document or in the folders? Is it, do you know if it's loaded through like Google Drive?
So while we work on this,
It's on my
Yes, you do. We have a
desktop.
we
I
have
can
a
try to
send it to you. Want to try to email to just so I can share the screen with folks. Sorry about that. Should have asked for your presentation before.
Yes. Are any of these the
You can use the wireless. Who's coming in person or?
Susan was planning to come in person, I think. And I know we have a number of people who are, I know Elizabeth is on vacation and was planning to call in and isn't going to be able to. One short.
It's not like a.
We're one short of quorum here. So what could we do?
Should be.
Doug, would you like to talk about the end of Robin?
Well, we have a vote, probably need a quorum.
Yeah, we think people need to actually hear. What you got to say.
So Anna Roslyn is a relatively small site. It's only less than half an acre. They're going to demolish an existing building, which is relatively small, Columbia Pike. It's too far from here, as a matter of fact, about 3 or 4 blocks. And it hits the GBIP, but not much more. There are no trees on the current property, and they are going to plant 14 trees and have a number of planters both at street level and on some of the top 4 levels, bottom 4 levels of the building. So it comes in at 0.67, which is not awesome, but not great. They're going to have electric heating and air conditioning. They're going to have electric hot water heating, and they're going to have electric cooking for the residential units, but they're going to use diesel for a backup generator. So it's a story we've heard many times before. So I sent around the letter, which hopefully you've had a chance to read.
I know Joan and I sent you a few comments before this draft, but I don't think there were any more.
Did you get my latest comments?
The minimum EV charging, the 4% with chargers, 15% EV charging ready. So I did incorporate all your changes in.
Yeah. I mean, the interesting thing about this is the energy model actually has 3 scenarios. They don't tell you which one you're. All of them would exceed the 24%. The lowest one was at 25 to 28%, somewhere around there, but they had 2 others that were hitting over 35%.
I did talk to their sustainability person. She said they had not yet decided what
Yeah, so,
they were going to use.
so again, it's, this is, again, they're committing to what they have to commit to meet the GB, and it makes perfect business. Why overcommit than when you don't have to, but, it's encouraging them to just go ahead with the much more energy efficient. And those would actually include hot water heat pumps, which is kind of the first time I've seen that in the building. So somewhat more efficient HVAC systems, but, and then the hot water heat pumps.
Are there any questions? Thought it looked good. I think it's right. It's scoring right in line with all the ones that we've been, we had that big clutch of SPRCs and a bunch of them scored right with, what's the score, 67?
67.
They've been right in that area, except for one Roslyn, which was well below that. So I think this is, as you said, a story we've heard many times before. It's right in line with everything. So thank you. And I think we'll hold the vote in the hopes that we will get one more person. But if we don't, because we do have plenty of people online calling into the vacation, we'll just vote on things. And then next month, well, we're not meeting on it, but in September, we'll, ratify or whatever. It's hard to get forms in July. So
We can't do like an online.
not under the Virginia table.
No, and you can't move on.
I think they wanted to put this to the board in September. So,
Right. Well, so we're going to vote on it today.
okay.
We're going to wait until we see if somebody else comes. I
Okay.
think Liliana will probably
Oh, good.
come. But I see, what to my wondering eyes, but do I? Your PowerPoint.
It's like Christmas Day.
Exactly. So I'm very glad to see that. And so Kim, over to you.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks for having me here today, Doug. I really appreciate, our introduction and our conversation.
Great conversation about more than just this.
On a number of topics. The city mentioned.
Best restaurants in Crystal City.
You name it. I think we talked about it. But, I'm really appreciative to come and chat with you all today, namely because one of my passions is to help folks understand certain elements of sustainability, and certainly from a developer perspective. I happen to be working for a developer right now, but I've worn many hats across the value chain of real estate. And it certainly, and specifically, I've been in the real estate sustainability game here in the DC metro area for my entire career. So it's been really fascinating and interesting to see how not only Arlington's incentive program, but all of the other jurisdictions in this area, how they're all sort of handling and grappling with the same topic. Little fun fact is that the very first office building that went through the incentive program, the Navy League building, I worked on that building. It happened to be, I was working for Davis Construction at the time, and also very pregnant with my first child. So that was how you know,
Very
it's been a while, but all of that to say, hopefully today we're gonna, just build a bit of awareness surrounding sustainable development, again, from the developer perspective. So looking a little bit at challenges and opportunities, and certainly I would love for this as questions either come up, or if you want to ask questions at the end, whatever, I'm happy to entertain whatever kinds of questions come up. I'm here to help and provide information. So first things first, sustainable development. From that perspective, as a developer, how do we define and how are we looking at sustainable development? First and foremost, we're interested in the highest best use of land. And the way that we see that through the eyes of what we build is that it's a mixed use sort of environment. It's been a while. Where it's a mixed use, where you have an activated street level with retail places, where people want to come, spend time, people live, people work.
Kim, I know you're just getting started. This is
Yeah.
your first slide.
Sure.
But since Susan has joined us,
It's really fine. I will go.
do you just
I
want to
am
say-
not constrained on the back end. Sorry. We have
Okay.
family transportation.
Yeah, no, you're welcome anytime.
Yeah.
And we have a bunch of C2E2 members on vacation who are all calling in.
Oh, great. Okay.
Okay, Kim, back to you.
Sure.
Welcome,
Sure.
Susan.
Good to see you. Susan and I go way back, actually. So it's been a long time, but, and then also to a low consumer of natural resources and human resources. We want to be as efficient as possible, not just during construction, but also the hold on the property. For us, we do hold our properties long-term. So we definitely value and understand that what we are designing in the development and in new construction actually needs to be set up to be a good steward for the environment in that operational stage. Probably the other things are pretty self-explanatory here, but I will say that the other big thing for us is that we're adding value to the community in which we are placing that building, in which we're going to serve communities. We feel very strongly about local minority businesses and really giving the flavor and providing what the community wants and not just what we think needs to go there. So moving on to the next item, I wanted to focus a little bit on some of the financial considerations from a developer perspective. Now, there certainly are, land costs, there are real estate fees, et cetera and so forth. But what I want to talk about are the three sort of critical items, which you can go to this next slide. And these particular elements, the development costs, the capital stack, and the revenue and exit strategy on the building these are like the trifecta for a developer. If any of these particular elements are not forecasted appropriately, literally that will kill a deal. Now, I think that the piece about these three that are not necessarily forecasted are market conditions. There are certain things that happen in the marketplace that are really tough to forecast, but we'll talk about that in a minute. So just so we're all level setting, development costs comprise the hard costs, soft costs, and contingencies for a project. So any of the projects that are going through the approval process with Arlington, when they're coming in, there's already a pro forma / budget that has been developed, and the hard cost of construction is actually built into that. Why this particular element matters is that underestimating the cost, the physical cost for the building is one of the top reasons that a project will fail. And that's not necessarily because the developer may be looking at the pro forma and saying, oh, this doesn't work. It's taking it to the capital stack. The capital stack is super important. It's where you're funding the project. Are you funding the project from equity that's private? Are you funding, are you putting in your own money as a developer? There are private developers around the county that do kind of put their own money in, but a majority are actually going to banks to pull financing from. And so the debt on that through a bank will actually put lending requirements on a project to finance the project to earn a certain profit. And basically a bank is going to go through and de-risk a particular project by putting different lender covenants into an agreement, which forces the developer to make a certain amount of profit in that forecasting. So this becomes super important. The way the project is financed impacts the cash flow for the project, any of the risk exposure, and ultimately the return on investment, which a developer does not, we don't have control. I'm saying developers don't necessarily have control over those lender covenants and what a bank is requiring you to do. And I think that's, you know, a lot of times developers are looked at as having all of this money. Well, not all money is created equal, quite frankly. And, you know, a developer does have to be responsive to ultimately the bank. So. Sure.
Staying on that real quick.
Yeah.
Can you just give a rough sample of what typical loan to value ratios would be? And can you talk about repayment schedules? Are we talking 10-year, 5-year, 20-year, 30-year? I have no idea.
Right. It completely depends. So the payback for the schedules, you know, some terms are a 5-year mortgage, some are a 10-year. You're not really going to get much past than a 5 to 10. Loan to value ratios, again, it varies in the banking environment. And I can get some of the ballpark ratios. I just don't have one off the.
I mean, with a lender loan 80%?
They won't, not for
50%?
that.
Between 50 and 80?
Yeah, it's gonna be somewhere between 50 and 80. I'm gonna go with 60. Just because it's in between. But it's very similar. I mean, it really is similar to, you know, residential real estate if you're buying a single family. I mean, these are just projects that are, you know, much larger, much bigger dollars. But location matters, you know, that return on investment matters, et cetera, and so forth. So with respect to revenue and exit strategy, this is a forecasting piece where a developer is looking at rental income. It's really rental income less the operational expenses. And there's, you know, it totally depends on the market, how high or low rental income is. And that's certainly something as a developer that our teams track very closely, is what is going on in the rental market, how much have rents increased over the last handful of years. And, you know, we're always tracking where you can set in the market the rent for multifamily units as well as office. The other element of revenue that's looked at is absorption rate, which is how quickly, if it's a multifamily building, how quickly can those units sell or rent if it's a condo versus an apartment home building. From an exit standpoint, we're always looking at the exit. When you're building a pro forma, you're looking at the potential sale of the building, how it holds its value, where it might be priced in relation to other buildings in the market, et cetera, and so forth. And there's a particular cap rate that's evaluated, which is just a percentage looking at what the net operating income is for a property versus what the current market value for that building is. And it's just represented in a percentage. Again, the ranges, typically it's what a bank on a repayment would require. But those are just some of the things that we look at when we're looking at these various deals. And these three items from a forecasting standpoint, it really is a situation where any little bit can kind of take the project off the rails. So just
Such as interest rates going up,
Right.
interest rates going up
Interest rates going
substantially. in the
up.
past 9 months.
exactly.
Yeah.
So that's a big, it really is what's going on in the marketplace. So like I said, there are other, factors that are taken into consideration from a budgeting perspective, but these are the three from a development perspective that really impact the project. So the next one, so as I mentioned, certain market conditions are elements that we do track that cannot necessarily be forecasted as kind of finitely as a bank coming in and saying, here's what the covenant is, for a particular loan. So one of the things that we are tracking very closely has to do with construction costs and how it is impacting new construction starts in the marketplace. I'm sure I'm not the first one to kind of tell all of you, we're at an all-time low in the DC metro area for new construction starts across all, different market types. Obviously, commercial office buildings, for certain obvious reasons, and multifamily is really, really tough. I know for our particular company, we did not start any multifamily construction in 2024. We're not starting anything in 2025. And it has to do with construction costs and interest rates and terms and conditions of our banks. We just can't move projects forward. So as a owner of real estate, we at least have our operating assets that, that are very much a part of our business. But it is, that is the reality of the marketplace right now. I don't think this is unusual to JBG Smith specifically. It's all developers in this area. And it's really meant to, just sort of show what the reality is here. That's where I think from a construction cost standpoint, additional requirements from a county perspective will feed into additional construction cost, and then also will feed into that piece of the trifecta that we were talking about with respect to development cost and first cost of construction. That will then also feed into a bank telling us whether or not they will finance a project. If the construction costs are too high, then we're not going to get the financing on those buildings. So it's a bit of a cycle, a little bit of a vicious one at this time. But it's this is what's happening in our marketplace, and it's starts have been the lowest that they've been in 25 years. That's huge. And that's not, that's a problem everywhere. And, those realities.
Interesting whether that changes the calculation when you're looking at potential reuse of building.
I think it is going to depend on the developer. If the developer has a bench of operating assets, JBG Smith does have quite a bit of that in the National Landing area. However, reuse and adapting them to a multifamily situation is not appropriate for every single building. It has to be, the footprint has to be a certain footprint and not all of the commercial office buildings have been set up that way. So we do have a few that are coming through the approval process right now where we have been able to sort of that. And that is, I mean, I'm sure you may see it in various publications, et cetera, and so forth, but that is a big thing. It's a huge thing right now, those conversions, which is great. I think from an environmental story perspective, you know, all of that embodied carbon that is already sort of built and put out there is, you know, is the best. Recycling buildings is the best thing that we can do from a carbon emission standpoint. So any thoughts, questions there before we sort of like jump into some of the green building specific items?
Question on financing and insurance, like, are those markets beginning to be kind of climate resilient focused? You know, so do you have, are there green mortgage or green financing? Or is it like with the 5 to 10 year view, it's, you don't see it?
Not seeing it, the most that we're seeing in the bank space right now is not so much surrounding any climate related risk. It still is very much focused on building certifications, using that as a proxy for a durable and high quality asset. So, you know, we happen to have some sustainability linked financial instruments that we can use, and it's specifically tied to building certifications. From an insurance perspective, certainly nothing that is chronic is covered by insurance, but what we are hearing, we sort of batch and pool our insurance providers. So there are a lot that we work with. And really their feedback, there isn't anyone that's providing any kind of a premium reduction for any resilience efforts. It's more so becoming a condition of whether or not your building can be insurable. So I know there are maybe 1 or 2 maybe insurance providers out there that do provide premium reductions, but they are few and far between, and they are for very specific small project situations. So
We had Redbrook come in a year or so ago, and they noted that they actually had an easier time getting financing because it was the Douglas that's
right.
aiming to be a zero carbon building. So, of course, they're in DC, which has got certain requirements that buildings are going to anyway. Right. So,
yeah,
you know, whether that's indication that, you know, going for the higher certification is the way of kind of getting potential for locking in financing, right? Locking in their terms.
Yeah, it completely depends on the bank that you're going to. I can tell you, like Bank of America is sort of like the big banks are not.
They don't care.
No.
And Redbrook was very clear that the Douglas, they're gonna own it and operate it. So just as you said, they want it to be environmental, but the rest of their buildings, if they're not gonna operate it, they don't do anything.
Right.
It's kind of shocking. We're very open about that.
Right. Yeah.
So, a lot of factors in play.
Yeah, definitely. It's, you know, if it was as easy as being, you know, sort of like a one size fit all.
Life would be so.
I know, right? We wouldn't have to have any of these discussions. So, great. Well, I thought that I would take the opportunity to talk about some of sort of the challenges and opportunities that a developer faces, and putting it in the context of really specifically looking at the green building policy, that incentive policy update, and some of the things that we see, and potentially some of the ways that C2E2 can potentially, you know, actually support and help in this next update. So some of the things that I wanted to chat about were surrounding certifications, electrification from a heat pump water heater situation. I know that you all were just sort of talking about that, but looking to opine a little bit on some other nuances. electrification, and specifically with EV charging. And then talking a little bit about energy modeling and some of the limitations of how things are set up right now and what the county, what is being focused on versus, and, some of what those limitations are on that. So wanted to touch on LEED certification. I know that the newer update here is proposing also FIAS, which FIAS is actually newer to the US. It does take an adaptation of Passive House that was developed in Germany in 1997, I think it was, but FIAS actually was sort of launched in 2006 in the US, which kind of takes that Germany focused guidance and puts a US spin on it with the different climate zones, et cetera, and so forth. But not necessarily speaking too much about that. We have 0 projects that have ever, utilized that particular rating system, but wanted to draw awareness to LEED and how points across the LEED green building rating system are actually allocated across many projects. Now, this, of course, is JBG Smith specific. I do know that there is this kind of point allocation that is available through the US Green Building Council, which actually takes many of their projects, if not all of their projects, in their portals and case studies, and actually does a very similar kind of breakdown. And I think that what we see in ours kind of rides a very similar and parallel line to what the USGBC has actually seen across projects. I want to hone in on the energy and atmosphere component because that percentage of points achieved at 33%, just in a squint test up there, you see very quickly that it's the lowest point allocation. Exactly. Many projects that are urban in nature are going to, kind of slam dunk the location and transportation and a lot of the sustainable sites. But the place where the green building incentive policy and where other folks want to push higher levels of LEED certification, this is sort of showing that pushing on that higher level of certification does not necessarily mean that you're getting a better energy performer from a building perspective. So what I see with my development teams and a lot of other development teams with developers is that it is not about the certification itself. It's really surrounding what do you want more of? And it's in that energy and atmosphere category. So where do you pull the levers and set up, projects or buildings for a higher level of success and what you want more of, which is a better performing building. But this again is working to demonstrate that it's the category that has the lowest number of points.
Now, with the
across
movement to LEED 5 in particular, does that put more emphasis on energy, or is it kind of set up the same way that you can pick and choose and therefore you can emphasize some of these critical elements?
It's still set up with the major categories. Energy and atmosphere is reconfigured where it's taking a blend of energy consumption and carbon emissions, but ultimately it's the same. LEED versus, same focus. I'm sure I would go, sort of on off record saying it's probably an unintended, second and third order effect. I don't think that was ever, the intention of the rating system was never to point chase, et cetera, and so forth. It was inspired to, it was used to inspire. And the top category and the top concern of LEED has always been energy and atmosphere. So it's really interesting to know that that's the mission of the organization, and that's always been the mission of the rating system. But the actual results are not right. So, So I think that that's, again, this is here to sort of build awareness, and help, help folks understand that, rating systems do not necessarily translate into.
Would it make more sense, or would developers more like to have just, get rid of the certification altogether?
Yeah.
A second.
I'll just say that, yes. And focus on what
Because our
matters.
frustration too is that LEED doesn't lead to electrification, and it doesn't necessarily maximize energy performance, which are so crucial to decarbonization.
Right.
So,
It's always how you get,
yes.
that's your.
So again, it seemed to be, going in, I think it was just, well, it's a good way of just, if you're
Right.
getting this, you're getting it, except that, all of a sudden they were requiring Energy Star, they're requiring performance, showing perform, because LEED wasn't even necessarily leading to even the modeled projections of, say, energy consumption.
Right. Exactly. So, yeah, so I've seen other counties, handling it where, I happen to be also working with Alexandria, and their proposal that they have on the table, if you've been looking at that, actually completely takes certifications off the table and focuses on EUI.
Yeah.
It's not to say that the other elements of environmental sustainability are not important, but in a situation where focus is on carbon emissions and carbon reduction, you've got to focus where that lever is, and it's in energy and in that carbon emission reduction.
Are they proposing any other like standards, Alexandria, or are they just want to get rid of it and just have dialogue?
They were getting rid of it. I do think that they have a path that does follow a certification route if a project, so it's opening it up for, different flexibility and opportunities. But ultimately, it was the feedback of the advisory group to just sort of, go with the energy use intensity. It's the easiest way to evaluate the energy performance of a building and, really kind of focus in on that.
Maybe here. I agree with you. It's shocking that it's 33% only, but embedded emissions are high, and you're not going to change that in building unless you have some sort of push or incentive towards low carbon concrete, low carbon steel, and that's part of material resources. And then the other big point is water. Water is going to be a huge problem.
Yeah.
The availability of fresh water and efficiency of water is also important. So as much as I like the idea of hitting it on energy and atmosphere, I think that it is important to look at all the other, I don't know,
As I
categories as well.
Right, as I mentioned, it's not discounting, some of the importance, but the reality of the situation, and I will just state this from my personal sort of opinion and experiences. Having spent 20 years of my career in construction specifically, I can tell you that the push is not necessarily on the construction, the people who are putting the building together, because we're putting a building together based on what has been designed into the project, and it's a contract. We have to provide that. It's really the manufacturers and the makers of these different building products. And I can tell you very specifically that they are all looking at that. Our market here from a concrete perspective, we do have Carbon Pure in our area that's being proactively used in all mixed designs, not just for cast in place concrete, but also for concrete block manufacturing. So, these advancements are being made. And some of the push may be coming from the LEED Green Building Rating System, but it's a much bigger effort than just what you would do.
I agree with you. But every little thing helps. And with all these changes for materials, what you need is the push of demand, and demand comes from the buildings that are developed, and whomever is looking at approving those buildings and checking that these buildings are working towards using low carbon materials, that's a push. And so that's why I believe that we should not discount it, because that's the future.
Right.
Except
maybe-
that certainly lead 4 doesn't really focus on, I don't know about lead 5. But again, then
Right.
again, you're in this,
So that's
we
why
can pick and choose, so we don't have to put much emphasis on this issue. We'll go and frankly, anybody developing in Arlington's got to head up, because they're developing in already a well-developed area, so, you know, near transportation and things like that, so they can get a bunch of points right off the bat just because of location of where they're building.
Right.
Right,
Yep.
so for our own C2E2 checklist, we tried to step away from certification and pick the things we cared about and required them. But we gotta let you keep going.
Sure. So there, I just had a few, recommendations. I think the big one was, just sort of rely on, Lead to, as the newer versions come out, they're updating, they're already improving.
Right, and they do have
And
a lot
just
of
like let them
expertise.
do the thing. And sort of,
People know them. We don't have to just educate them that here in Arlington, we want blah, blah, blah.
Right.
There's a lot to be said for using a national standard.
yeah, and I think, there does seem to be a pretty heavy push to go to a higher level of certification, which again, does not necessarily get you more of what you want. Is it the certification that's important to you, or is it the results of the certification? So, pushing to a higher, does not necessarily get you what you want. So,
We kind of throw it in there figuring there's something broadly there that represents some degree of sustainability, but it doesn't. But, the other elements on what we look at are much.
So just stepping away from certifications for a moment and looking specifically from an electrification standpoint, and looking at this specifically from a multifamily perspective. This is coming from, some JVG Smith experience specifically here, where most of the buildings that we are bringing online at the moment are centralized systems that are gas fired. We are aware, and our designers are aware, that there are opportunities to pivot to all electric systems. We also are very aware that other cities across the country are using electric centralized systems, not unlike New York, et cetera. So we are aware of this. The difference between the New York market and the DC market has to do with the fact that New York has super tall buildings, and super talls actually have mechanical floors built in, at a certain, anywhere between, I'm not exactly sure, anywhere between 15 and 20 stories. What we're building here is typically about 20 stories. So what that means from a development perspective is that those centralized systems on electric, it takes a lot more to push that water to the higher levels, and we don't have the opportunity to create a mechanical floor to actually get those particular systems to work properly. And therein, sort of lies the dilemma with that centralized system. So some of the alternatives to that are using electric resistance, which I think we can all agree is not a great option. And certainly we've heard and seen and done a lot more research and pricing on the heat pump water heaters. Some of the realities that we have found with this is, number one, you do have to increase the tank size. If you were going to be doing, I'll just say a 50-gallon tank, you would size up to a 75 in order to compensate for the loss of heat. Another element of that is that the airflow around the units, you need a lot more space to do that. And how you vent the excess cool or heat out of that, a lot of times ends up venting back into the apartment units. And that creates other second and third order effects from moisture reductions in indoor air quality from that. So those are just, sort of, putting out there, some of the realities. The other thing is that just like if anybody has an electric heat pump at their house, that when it gets to a certain, temperature outside, those systems run in auxiliary mode. And it is the same thing with these systems. And the moment that these systems go into auxiliary mode, this modeled 200% efficiency is completely blown out of water. So all that to say is that, these possibilities do exist. A lot of times when there are studies and models that provide the information and show, just the numbers that we're seeing here, that 200% efficiency, that looks awesome. It looks great on paper, but unfortunately it doesn't take into account, weather, people, all of the other things. It's a static model at a point in time and just does not represent, necessarily the reality. So it's, again, not to say that these things cannot be done. It's just, how do we do these things?
Have you seen any examples of actually having done that? Having it been done?
Not in our market so far.
But in other markets?
I want to say New York is one of the markets, but I'm not necessarily familiar with the operational. I can just say, what our engineers have advised us to do.
Have you looked at tankless and does that change the dynamics?
We have not looked at tankless. Part of the reason is because the electric side of it, it does need more space, et cetera, and so forth, more space than you would think, and they're not necessarily as efficient. So there just are certain challenges with various technology. I've seen some recent studies on just sheerly looking at, okay, well, if there's a gas system, if there were gas water heaters in the units, we don't put gas water heaters in the units necessarily, but if there were, what does a retrofit look like? Later on, could you come in? And the retrofits pose a challenge because of the amount of space that's needed, the fact that you do have to upsize the tank, et cetera, and so forth. So price point wise, these, they increase the cost per unit, somewhere in the neighborhood of $1,500 a unit. So again, those are real costs. If you end up having, 200 units in a building, you can imagine what that cost is. And then going back to, sort of that trifecta of first cost of construction, what banks will do, it's again, a bit of this cycle. It would be really interesting to see how designs and things like that can sort of overcome these challenges. And I'm confident that they will. I mean, I think, people will get creative. So any thoughts, any questions about that aspect?
You said it was like a lot of the weather, like interfere with the auxiliary mode or whatever. Is that something where like the heat waves that are coming through are getting larger and longer? Is that going to affect, you think, the heat pumps a lot?
Yeah, that's an interesting question because I don't know, maybe I don't really have a direct answer for that.
Auxiliary mode usually kicks in more. Sure.
Because you're wanting to produce
Pulling heat out of the air. To heat
Right.
the water.
Typically where these units are placed are inside of the unit, which is gonna be conditioned. So whether or not, you know, there's.
Why would why does the auxiliary need to, what do you need to worry about auxiliary if it's inside a unit? Where you don't have to worry about what the outside temperature is.
That's a good question.
Because, you know, I've got one, you know, when I know it's got the electric that can kick on, but I thought that was only if you really wanted it to heat up a lot quicker.
Right,
Because it takes longer for it to reheat.
right. Yeah, for these, I'm not sure. I'm just not as familiar with the,
Yeah.
you know, with the mechanics
Yeah.
on it. There are a lot of, depending on the climate zone, there's a lot of, you know, conjecture on where you should actually install the units. That's
Really interesting. But on to EV charging.
Yes, EV charging, I think, so electric vehicles, you know, what we have seen, we have been able to get to, our newer developments. I think we've been steadily offering or being able to come in at a design of 15% for parking spaces. And that seems to be a bit of a sweet spot where it does not necessarily increase equipment or a heavy up to the building that Dominion will come in and give us an additional transformer, et cetera, and so forth. So what we have seen be successful is kind of after the fact. We happen to, across all of our buildings, we know our EV footprint, and we also have the data as to how much these particular units are actually utilized. And if they're being utilized and, you know, we need more, we can say, and we actively do, we bring online more EV charging stations year over year, but it's specifically where they're being used and where we need more. So we have seen it be more successful to go into after the fact and ask for additional capacity and bring that successfully through than trying to lump in 25 to 50% on the front end of design and run the risk. I mean, we have not just our own projects, but we know of other developers who have gone in with those numbers and Dominion has rejected both letters. So I think that's just, again, you know, how do you get more of what you want? Well, maybe there's some opportunity within the Green Building Incentive Program for a day 2 or day 3, you know, down the road to work to address as capacity.
What do you find? I think what we've always looked at is if you get enough of the wiring or the conduits, if that's not a challenge, say expand to, you know, 50% of the building, you can do that without a lot more cost.
It comes down to capacity, and if Dominion will give you that space. You can put it, yeah.
Is assuming that Dominion will provide you with the electricity when you really need it. Yeah. Is it a real challenge of, because a lot of these, the older buildings, you know, they're not wired for, it's going to be very expensive to rent wiring, I think, before you start talking about load.
Yeah. Right.
So,
yeah, I mean, it depends. I mean, we most of our EV deployments, you know, have actually been in existing buildings and existing parking garages. And I mean, that's a lot less than having to go through the interior of a building, quite frankly, trying to run wiring, et cetera, through parking garages.
It's want to welcome Joe, who's been upstairs at the River House SPRC. So
Excellent.
Double to me.
Kim, could you just
Say, like, if you were trying to get to 50% EVs on day 2, day 3, or day 100 or something, would you build more conduit or anything like that to make it easy, even though you don't have the load letter yet? Like, what would you do if you knew as a developer?
If we knew, I think what we have offered is to increase the vault size in the event that, for the most part, if you're going to a 25 or a 50, you likely will need additional capacity for the building. So we'll create the vault space for future, if possible. The part of that though on vault space is that many times, I mean, we're, fitting a lot of things into the street, et cetera, and so forth. And, more times than not, it does start to encroach upon county identified spaces that are prohibited for folks to go into. So it does create, again, discussion that needs to happen in order to, to try to bring, some of that online. So just a sort of recommended strategy would be to, kind of maybe push to that, that 15%, but anything above that, work it into a day 2 or day 3 kind of situation.
That's all we've ever recommended.
So this is actually funny because I ran out of the River House one with the question about the EV charging for the development. And what was interesting about that is that they were pursuing 4% and 15%, I think, for one of the buildings, but they weren't pursuing any charging for some of the others. And so I was wondering how that kind of, because it's a JBG Smith managed in development. So I was wondering how that kind of correlates with this, where you're talking about the goals, but they're proposing new developments that don't have any at all.
Right. I think from a contextual standpoint, River House is, I mean, I would imagine, and if I'm recalling correctly, there are other areas that the EV chargers are going to meet the intent and the requirement. My guess is that if they're not showing up in spaces, it's either, due to space, there's other considerations for that, but I can't necessarily speak to it off the top.
Yeah. Probably very silly question, but when you look at this requirement and the inability to get Dominion to say yes, have you ever, your designers, considered that if you work with solar and battery, you need to empower the own building to have the load that you would need, not only for the building, but maybe for the charging. And then the requirement from Dominion will be less, yes? I mean, I'm just trying to be creative here.
It's, and I appreciate the creativity. And yes, it is something that is looked at. Unfortunately, the amount of power that is needed for this far exceeds the footprint of what a roof could offer. So just to give, some context is that, you might be able to satisfy electrical demand of a building at the most in our market, 2% of the electrical demand. That's not a lot. So battery storage could, double it to 4%. But again, it's not necessarily, it's a very small drop in the bucket. So.
In other states, like if you're in Maryland, you're working with a different utility.
Right, yes.
Do you get to a different conclusion?
Do we get to a different conclusion? We don't have any,
You don't have it.
No.
Dominion's pretty highly rated if you compare it against other.
Yeah,
highly
but the
rated
load
for
level,
not.
Oh, this is.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right.
It gives me some good news.
Yeah.
Well, then long term, there's the vehicle to grid is, where you can provide a service by having all these electric vehicles plugged in and they can help balance during peak hours.
Right.
But I don't think Dominion's quite
They're not there yet.
Not there yet. And I think that, the thing that's interesting is not interesting, but something to know, and things that I've learned from a utility perspective, their biggest concern is servicing their customers. And anything from a risk perspective, anything that is out of their control, which is very much EVs and plugging them in and, kind of pulling energy off of these EVs. They cannot control that, and they cannot guarantee that that is going to, satisfy the capacity. So that's just something that I picked up and, being in the room, sort of with these utilities, talking about sort of these issues. And, when they can't necessarily guarantee that power is going to be flowing all the time, they're gonna see it as a risk, and they're gonna.
Can you say a little bit more about, and then we have to keep moving, but the leverage real-time EV deployment based on.
That was what I was talking about, just for us, JBG Smith, we do have, we've got real-time tracking and EV charging across the EV portfolio.
Got it.
So, and just being able to dynamically see that, and if there's a building, yes, you can match, okay, this building has a lot of usage, so let's go ahead and deploy more EV charging stations. This one doesn't, so we're not gonna, we're not gonna do anything. It's just responding to the need.
Kind of set up so that people just charge when they need to charge. And then
Right.
So
there is going to have to be
kind of get a sense of what percentage of car owners can work with that.
Yeah.
So that, because again, we tend to almost think of everybody wants their own parking space charge.
Right. Yeah.
But if there's other, what other ways of doing it, so that you need 100% vehicle owners, and maybe people own fewer cars anyway.
Right.
We can always help if we're dreaming here,
Yes. Yes. Okay. Moving into the next area, which is sort of the last piece from a challenges perspective that I just wanted to note. It really comes down to energy modeling. So there's a huge difference between energy cost savings and energy use savings. And currently, all of the metrics that are being used and what is being asked to be provided to show energy efficiency is based on energy cost savings. How LEED is set up, it's you are currently accruing points from an energy perspective based on how much you are impacting the cost for the energy, not necessarily the consumption. So it's a nuance I think that folks should understand, in that when a project might be coming through to prove out this is 20% better than code, or 22% better, it's typically saying that the cost for energy is that much more efficient, which interestingly, it is not a one-to-one, meaning that an energy cost savings reduction does not one-to-one mean an energy consumption reduction. It would be great if that were the case. But the I-Ching, or the king point in that is that gas systems have been the way that projects can show a lower energy cost savings because gas is cheaper. And so ultimately, again, sort of an unintended second and third order effect of what the LEED certification pushes demonstration of is on that cost savings. That is part of the reason why the newer additions of LEED are starting to focus more on a blend of carbon reduction as well to help temper that piece. So again, I think that's a challenge. That's often a limitation in the energy modeling, is that currently, what teams are coming forward with and being asked to show isn't even based on that consumption. As an organization, JBG Smith, our reduction targets, our energy targets are specifically on consumption and that use reduction, specifically for those reasons. It's kind of small on this, but if you can squint test it, you can see where the percentages are. Scroll down just a little bit. So EUI stands for energy use intensity, and that's sort of the, you know, the language that energy modeling speaks in with respect to how energy intensive a building is. The lower the number, the better. So that top is showing you that the energy consumption reduction is at a 26.7% for this particular building, but the actual cost reduction is only at a 25.8% reduction. So again, another awareness piece is that even if a project is coming through and they're saying that they have a, 20 or 22 or, percent reduction, you can be reasonably assured that their actual energy consumption reduction is a little bit higher. Because of that cost piece, especially if there's gas in the building, because that's where that savings is coming from.
So what is the EUI made of?
EUI is all of the energy consumed divided by the square footage. The cost is based on just energy cost annually for the energy.
So it's energy consumed times cost.
Energy consumed times cost. Yeah. Yeah. And again, energy models are point in time, pretty static, et cetera and so forth. So I think that it's helpful. Hopefully it's helpful to be, to just have that awareness that, again, if you're wanting a policy that moves to provide more energy efficiency and see more energy efficiency, understanding where the levers are to sort of pull, focusing on EUI is a better metric for the energy cost base.
So the one on top would say it's what you consume, no matter the cost, no matter the mix of fuels.
Right. Yes.
So we're going to let you continue to the end without any more questions.
So no worries at all. No worries at all. Doing my best to answer
Yes,
questions.
you absolutely are.
So, really with respect to the opportunities. So just, hopefully, we'll just sort of entertain this for a second. It was something that I've been thinking about, sort of going through the process with both, the folks in Arlington and also the folks in Alexandria, is really sort of this update word. The feedback that we have been able to garner from the policy side, we've asked on the why are we looking to update the policy? And the answer that we have received time and time again is because we said we would update the policy, which doesn't seem like the reason that an update should be happening. So, and I understand, I can understand, or maybe I don't understand, the necessary, the political pressures, et cetera, and so forth. But I did not see, with respect to what the policy itself, now I lifted this directly from the Arlington website on what the primary goal for the incentive policy is. And that's to reduce energy consumption, promote electrification, and EV readiness. And, with those things in mind, I haven't seen anything that specifically says an update means that you have to make the system harder. And I know that as a developer, that's what we're seeing, and some of the words that we've been hearing is, let's make this harder. I don't, and unless it's a situation where we think that we have too many projects that are utilizing the incentive program, or, if there's some reason to make it harder, I think that the opportunity here is to align, maybe look at what update means differently and really look at the pieces of the policy that maybe aren't working and jiving with what's going on in the marketplace. And how do you really lean into those things and create a solution that really works to get more of what you want, utilizing still some of what's there in the policy, but doing a right size on an update. Maybe it's not an overhaul, but rather it's, a realignment. So conclusions wise, it's, really working to address and identify the key challenges. And I know electrification and certifications and how much EV is the best option. Really sort of honing in on those challenges, I think is a huge opportunity with this particular update. And also, how can you realign energy cost versus energy consumption? We want lower consumption. And that, yes, lower energy costs, great. But if we're focusing on that, gas is going to win out every single time.
It's irrelevant because the prices change all.
I can tell you the gas prices are going down faster than electric. Harmonizing the approach, really working to, utilize this opportunity for this update to harmonize across other county programs. Where they're, in stormwater, are we looking for green roofs there? Just really kind of honing in on that. Also aligning, it's a great opportunity to align a little more closely with the community energy plan, the CEP. There are a lot of goals and, very specific tactics that are outlined in the CEP, but how can this, really sort of dial in on those particular things. And then the other one is from an adaptive reuse initiative piece. Developers really are very excited about this one. And it seems like there's an effort that's going on in the commercial market resiliency initiative. And then there's this piece in the GBIP that just seems like it needs to be knitted together a little bit better. So those are, I think, great opportunities to maybe just, look at this and that word update, maybe a little bit differently and manage, expectations on that a little bit differently than just updating for the sake of updating. Our concerns are, an update for the sake of an update when we're in market conditions where we can't even start a project. We're not getting more housing. We're not getting more of the things that the community needs. So, those are my thoughts. I really appreciate your time and attention today. And I've answered some of your burning questions and provided, some awareness and maybe some things that you didn't necessarily know before. But happy to answer the questions.
Just a kind of way to put it is, are there incentives out there that would actually could be put in place that would really kind of encourage developers to, do the best they can do? I mean, right now we're in a case of, 24% energy cost reduction, which get your point, it doesn't, so that's all they promise. Right. Even if you look at the building and they probably could do better. So right. Where is it in kind of getting to an EUI of 30 or even 25? Or, how to, what kinds of incentives would actually tax incentives,
tax incentives,
expedited permitting. Nobody cares about that, right?
They're already doing expedited.
Right. I mean, if we're not even in an environment where we can start a project, it's not going to even get to the permit office.
Right.
So, I mean, it really, real estate taxes, that's a huge place. And there certainly is precedent throughout the country on that. Though I know Virginia has its challenges.
Yes,
it's not empowered at the state level to do certain things. So, so that makes it, certainly really difficult. I think, and we didn't necessarily get into it, but it's interesting when you look at paper models, right? Modeling that says that buildings can get to a 30 EUI or a 26 on paper. The challenge with that is that most of the base modeling follows a prescriptive path and not a performance path. In the prescriptive path, it sets very specific parameters for window to wall ratio. And currently, the window to wall ratio that is baseline in energy is 40%. Newer iterations of IECC, actually 2024, I think is starting to get into the 30 window to wall ratio. But I can tell you that's probably the biggest opportunity from a design perspective. Because each percentage point you're going over a window to wall ratio of 40, it doesn't matter what you put by way of systems in your building, you're always, you're working against the window to wall ratio. We've had a lot of success in just really honing in on that modeling activity and really sort of challenging that window to wall ratio to sort of help.
The smaller the windows.
Yeah.
The less, not so much, and actually I think that's where people think, they need small windows. But the configuration and how you articulate the windows and the sizes, it doesn't necessarily have to mean really small windows. And that's like the design challenge for an architect, right? It's like, okay, I don't want a window to wall ratio to be more than 40%. And our teams have come up with really beautiful solutions in the neighborhood of 42 or 46%. And that's a change, and that's a shift from a 60% or an old glass building. These are things that can happen now. But the models, paper models, do have buildings that are literally a rectangle, and they have like windows, like punch windows this big. No one would want to occupy that building. Our buildings are for people, and no one's going to want to live in those types of buildings. So we're working on that.
Kim, you have multiple questions online. I don't know if it's easier for me to just email them to you after, because Cindy, I don't know if
I'm
we're.
happy to do my best.
There are a lot of them.
That makes sense.
Yeah, that's fine.
Right, I think we'll have to move on. It's too bad.
Yeah, I certainly.
Sorry to everybody online.
Other orders of business.
Sorry to everybody online, but because we were sharing screen with Kim, we couldn't see your questions until just now. They've just all been revealed.
Right.
I know they all made a special sense at the time that you asked them, so I apologize. But we will work with Kim to get back to you. So thank you, Kim, very much. We really appreciate that. Thank you for coming out in person. And yeah, there's just a lot of what you said that we have to think about and work into what we're doing. So any other thoughts?
Just for a later conversation, it's post occupancy. You guys are going to hold those buildings, many of them, for a long time. So what can we do as a county with our incentives or otherwise to encourage ongoing iteration?
Right. I think that, obviously for someone like us, we're going to hold.
Yeah.
Right. But certainly there are folks out there that don't. I do think a good thing and a right move within the green building policy is the Energy Star, and that information share.
Yeah.
And also, yes, it's now more of a matter of course in the energy modeling stage during design, but actually requiring teams to show what the predicted Energy Star score would be is also a very telling piece of information, because you can see very clearly when you build out a code building and you put it into Energy Star predicted certification, it doesn't come anywhere close to hitting a 75, which is the, the threshold for actually certifying an Energy Star building. It's really woeful. So being able to translate the modeling outputs for that energy consumption and put it into a more predictive, and maybe, requiring that as part of the, because it's super easy to take that and just feed it into the systems. And we temper our energy modeling activity with that to ensure that what we're doing is actually setting it up for success, because that's the best indicator that we have right now, going from a paper model to, to an actual space.
Thank you very much. And that is even more. And I'm very glad Jen is here. Yes, you are welcome to stay. We're talking about.
But you're not officer.
I want to hear.
Right.
I wasn't sure if I was getting kicked out.
No, you're not getting, absolutely not getting kicked out. Right, open to the public and especially to our guest speakers. So since we now have a quorum, with many thanks to Joe for wearing 2 hats today, let's just quickly run through the items that have to. One of them I've seen come up, it's this. Jenna tells me every year we have to agree that we're going to abide by the county's electronic meeting policy, which I sent out. So all in favor of abiding by the county's electronic meeting policy? Thank you. Okay.
I vote no, principal. So.
I have something to say.
The June meeting summary, I had some comments on which Jenna accepted. Anybody else? I think, Joe, you said that you like the new format, which I like too. Any other comments?
No, made it a little easier to read.
So anything else about the summary? All in favor? I could ask somebody to make a motion. In favor? Thank you, Joe.
Second.
Okay, all in favor? Great, thank you. And then thanks to Joe and Liliana for not caring that Doug already gave his presentation on the Roslyn while you were here. And we learned that it's very much in line with the other buildings that we've been approving. The letter was sent around, the checklist was sent around. So any discussion? Questions?
Letter was easy to read. I like the brown.
Thank you.
So Doug, you're making a motion.
So I would move that we approve this letter and the accompanying checklist to go to the board with our comments on this particular project.
There's a second. Great. Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed or abstaining? Okay, so those were the low hanging fruit. So the next thing that I think we want to talk about that leads in from this deep discussion of Inner Roslyn that we just had is the deep discussion of One Roslyn that we had before and everything that has happened since then. Liliana presented to the board. Susan was obviously part of that discussion. John spoke. John Bloom, if he's still online, spoke. And the board had quite a detailed discussion, I think. I sent out the video with the links. But one of the questions that we had is, it's always going to be difficult. And to some of the discussion points that were made, it's not even clear that the board has the power to reject these buildings if they're meeting the basic standards that are the county standards. So the question I think for us is, how can we add some kind of, sorry, Kim, some kind of public pressure to make developers do these things that we want them to do? And, of course, as I think was pointed out earlier, if the building, people who are renting the buildings are demanding green buildings or demanding certifications, that's one area, but I don't know that we can make them do that. We could employ a press strategy, maybe. I was impressed that Penzance had, I don't know if they had anything to do with it, but there were several articles saying, oh, the Transportation Commission unanimously approved this. Oh, the Planning Commission unanimously approved this. Nothing anywhere saying C2E2 is, trying to get this building rejected. At the Planning Commission, a lot of people tried to sign up to speak against this project, but they were unable to do this glitch where the meeting was scheduled on Monday, but ended up happening on Wednesday, but you had to have signed up before the Monday meeting and you couldn't sign up by the Wednesday meeting. So I know we lost a lot of people who tried to sign up and weren't able to speak at the planning commission. And I know that, Lily, you felt kind of like the lone person because you were the lone person. But, you know, so trying to get more people to speak, trying to get, but this was at the planning commission.
Oh, sorry.
Yes. But at the board, I think we had a lot of speakers. And, you know, Joe.
My first question is that we have like kind of votes for the letter. And it seems like some of the other commissions that do this have votes for approvals project. Are we able to do 2 votes in which we can disapprove of projects and host a vote and say that we're declining it, and then approve a letter that says that we are not approving it? Like because when we vote for the letter and we say we approve it unanimously, kind of sounds like we're approving the project unanimously, giving consent.
Well, unless the letter, I mean, our usual letters say it's 67%, it's in line with blah, blah, blah. The one exception was this one Roslyn, right? Where we
Right.
say, one in your time, is there
I
anyone?
think I can
who
think of
recommended
2 other
rejected-
ones where we said that.
Recommended
like,
rejection.
Rejected.
Where I rejected.
Pardon? No.
No.
Oh,
Cindy, you also.
I mean, in one case, I think the county board convinced them to do something they were probably gonna do anyway, increase the energy efficiency score or something like that.
Henry, do you have a comment?
Yeah, it was actually a question, just because we're trying to think about how to better address some of these issues. And you mentioned that the board, you know, they're sort of going to adopt whatever the minimum standards are. Maybe another way to come at this is to think about how to change those standards. I don't know what the schedule is like for changing those standards or what the process is like to do that. But if that's something that we could think about, like when those standards come up for either
I think that's
they're
part
like
of
term
what-
limited.
Part of what's happened with GBIP and part of the minimum site conditions, I think we'll look at all of those things.
Yeah.
And Jen, I don't know if you would like to say anything. I know you, GBIP is not right in your area.
Right. No, I
Probably glad.
But but looking at all of these things is, and that is something I heard from the board.
Yeah, and the
Also,
manager committed
to-
I can
to the
send
winter
this over here, the manager
The winter
committed to,
solstice.
yeah, before the end of the year. And
No,
certainly.
he said the winter solstice, I want this extra 9 days.
Okay, all right, take the 9 days and run with it, but that there would be feedback on, you know, how are we processing the many pieces of feedback that have been
Right.
given. But I do think the prevailing takeaway from the one Roslyn conversation is our baseline, however we're gonna describe it, what we expect as a community for any building, we need to do a better job, you know, and it may be, we can get it wrong. So that's where the developers need to be there with us to say like, what is practical? Because we need to get buildings converted and built as well.
Right.
But there is a standard of carbon management, of energy management, and we've got to work with the building codes that the state gives us, but we can also have on a site plan project, we can have a condition that could have a different level. And that was the intent of the green building incentive policy. It's just, it's not really very powerful right now, both in what it offers, because nobody needs extra density right now, and also in what it accomplishes. So I think that's the puzzle. And I really think it's going to be a dance through that to figure out for this chapter, you know, we may not get as far as someone thought we would have gone 10 years ago, but we might bring the floor up for everything, and then have a true like reach
Or something beyond that. I think that I sensed a lot of frustration, not only on our part, but on the board's part. So John, I will call on you in just a second, but I have one question, which is transportation. Somehow the Transportation Commission, question directly for you, but the Transportation Commission has, the developers have to go before the Transportation Commission, and they get their own special bite at the apple. And I don't know how that came to be. You know, we participate through the SPRC process, and so does transportation, but then it goes to transportation and then it goes to planning, or many projects do. So if we wanted to have more of a more press attention, more whatever, they're having our own special hearing. But again, that adds to the exact opposite of expedited permitting.
Right.
You know,
And cost, yeah.
Yeah, and plus, we don't have time for these kinds of conversations.
Right, yeah, we'd have to have separate.
Do we really
meetings.
want every project to come for us?
Right.
There may not be any more projects for the next 18 months, is what I'm hearing.
Well, I also wonder, is there a way to be more transparent? Look, I understand the GPIP is an imperfect measure, but is there a way to provide greater transparency to the public by showing how every project, whether it's approved, but obviously the vast majority are approved, how they stack up against each other in these various categories?
Well, that's kind of what our checklist does.
But not in a dashboard kind of way.
Well, somebody'd have to go through and score every, kind of do a dashboard that would show every project, and unless there's somebody on this commission.
Well, no, I'm just saying,
Yeah.
we could figure out the technology and how to do it, but when you go by restaurants in some cities, they have an E-rating. I notice that all the time.
Right.
And I just wonder if there's some better way to convey.
The good housekeeping
In the
seal.
perfect system,
Yeah.
Yeah.
something.
And I think that whether it's Energy Star or an energy grade of some sort or carbon management grade, that could be something that building owners and operators opt into, and get some sort of gold star, or it could be a site plan condition for all of our site plans, or it could be an incentive. But I think that, and there are other cities that are doing it. I've been sending to Jen for traveling, right? And that feedback does help, and also helps the owners reap the benefit of being the good guys, right? So, yeah, I think those are all the tricks in trying some of that.
A certification. I don't know about giving them the flunky grades, but the certification at least.
Or whatever the grades are.
Yeah.
It's just like, again,
Right.
just the transparency of seeing how people stack up against, different projects stack up.
So right now is that they basically commit to the minimum. So they're not,
Okay.
that's why we essentially.
Kevin and then John.
I think we ought to focus more on flunking grades. I mean, I think when we have projects that come before us that we know are going to create a failure to achieve the county policy, which is decarbonization, which is a building which is coming in and they build in continued carbon use, doubling down, we need to learn how to say no. And I think we ought to come up with flunking grades on some of these and not just try to improve around the
So we want this one and nobody cares.
Well, I know, but what we need to do is figure out how to get some more. I think we need to get some more attention behind that flunking grade. And we need to focus on the fact that flunking our climate imperatives are nowhere near being met. We're just doubling down on the catastrophe.
So an idea, their point is GPIP should be directly linked to the county CDP. I mean, that's the most important thing.
Yes.
Right. And then do you guys find our Texas separately an irritant? You're not even aware of it. It's consistent.
We're
with
aware
the-
it's not necessarily, it's not completely transparent on every project. I know that when we've asked it, we've received it only through comments, and then sometimes we get it in a letter. Sometimes, other times we have had it in a table, which is really helpful. But it's a point to settle down.
Yeah. Well, John, I want to call it.
Thanks,
John?
Cindy. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. I just wanted to, as someone who was involved and commented at the board meeting, the key issue, which we didn't discuss there, is that, and it's kind of a forehead smacker, the standard site plan conditions are really, really weak. And we've never paid attention to those. And there will continue to be projects that opt out of the GBIP. And especially as incentives are weaker, and that's going to continue. And they can't just be automatically ushered to the basement. The ones who opt out are like every other site plan in every other community. They're still responsible for meeting our needs. And the site plan conditions should be set much higher, closer to the baseline of the GBIP. And then the county can negotiate and be flexible. The standard conditions are just a starting point, and they treat them as if they're inflexible. So I think we really need to pay attention to those if we want to avoid this particular situation. Thanks.
Thank you, John. Melissa, then Lily.
I think the issue we're getting to is if we get to the point of flunking, it's really not enough. Like it's too late. Like 3 have come through, they flunked, people are like, that's too bad. We've already been doing this for, 18 months of planning, all this work. So what we need to do is get in there much earlier. I think it's like a really easy, simple one-pager or something to the developer that's like, if you do these like 5 things, we will be happy, but they need to receive it before they get here. Because by the time they get here, they put like thousands of hours in and they're at the last step.
But we have to be realistic. It's how much developers are going to listen to that. They've got to make the county happy and the county board happy. If they make us happy at the same
But if we're
time,
updating
you know.
the VIP, then that's.
And the site plan conditions and the
Yeah.
site plan process. I mean, it sounds to me like if you guys had whatever scorecard, that's weighted, just like you do for lead, you have that at the beginning, you're thinking about it. That could be put in with site plan, like here's our draft, from the developer, right? You can answer all those. It's not, you're looking at it, you're just recording the information later, but it might be a better time to have a conversation is where the SPRC gets going, and that's kind of
Right, well, would that be helpful?
tool that moves through.
I mean, what we have done is just taken the clearinghouse of experience, right?
Right.
And like, okay, this is what we were asked to do on this project. This was the C2E2 comments. We know that we're going to need to include these or have some stance on this.
Right.
And we're just taking that.
Right, you're doing it
experience.
from your experience, but
Right.
then a newer developer is not gonna
Right,
have that
exactly.
experience. And
Right.
I mean, I think we saw the same on adaptive reuse. You guys
Yeah.
can kind of anticipate some things because you've been in the market, but
Right.
we can build that into the process
Exactly.
and it would save you.
And I think where we see and where I can see other developers, not just us, that might be doing, 1 or 2 buildings in this area, it becomes like, you're like, who am I supposed to
Right.
respond to? And
Totally
what's
get
really
that.
important, because the checklist here is not the same as the GVIP, and it's not, what's connected to CE, like
Yeah.
it is really hard to follow if you're not.
Right, and if you're not doing GBIP, then the C2E2 checklist makes more sense. But if you are, then you really do have 2 separate
Right.
standards. So we've definitely heard that concern. Lily?
Yeah.
I was gonna say that I second John's comment about the bare minimum being the base of the GVIP or what the position is. Because the incentive policy is a non-mandatory and it's just an option that the developer has if it makes sense commercially speaking. But I think that we need to work on harmonizing the language that the county staff takes into account when assessing a project. And it varies depending on the, neighborhood. So the one for One Roslyn is the zone plan for Roslyn, which has specific language that speaks about a certain level lead standard for it. For example, I want and I check the Crystal City is different on sustainability. The one for Boston is different. So if we can work to harmonize the language of those plans and they have exactly the same language and it's a base minimum, that's what is required by the county staff as a measure to analyze this project, and we can harmonize that to our list as the bare minimum, and then it's very clear because it's harmonized. And then we will work with the plant, the energy plant, but that's the very bare minimum. Otherwise, it's very confusing.
I think the other way to look at that is to have the county identify, what its requirement, kind of minimum requirements are that align with the community energy plan and ultimately the climate action plan. And that supersedes anything that's in any sector plans, which some of them are 20, 30, 40 years old. You know, so, and most of them are, you know, they just kind of provide vague, you know, statements of, you know, we're gonna abide by the
It's a
community
good
energy plan
idea,
or this or that,
but they should
Leverage some AI technology,
update them.
do the scans and start lining up.
That would take a
Yeah,
county
yeah.
board, that would take a county board action to change the sector plan.
Well, and then you have to go through the whole
And
process.
it's a sector plan as a whole process.
Well, we can change the standard site plan conditions.
Okay.
For a site, like that.
And we can have countywide requirements related to sustainability that supersede anything in any of these sector plans, much of which is somewhat general to begin with.
Joe,
Yeah, I see this as like two separate discussions that are connected. One's like the process and our role in it, and the other one's decarbonization of the standards. And because I feel like the conversation gets confused between the two, which they're different. Because the SPRC, for example, the River House, it's a question I have actually for maybe Cindy or the committee or the commission, is that like for that, they're going through a PDSP right now, plus site planning review of 2 buildings and like 40 some row homes. How do I write a letter and one Excel on all of that and send it to the county board? Like it's really confusing. So I see reform on both of those, but it's kind of separate discussions.
Henry had a few notes.
right, I see them. Yep.
Yeah, I
Thank
don't
you.
know. It probably makes more sense to just, check them at the end. I don't want to lengthen the discussion here because I want to get to the legislative priorities. So thanks.
Yeah. Right. So speaking of so, in terms of what is our tool, is it public pressure? Should we be lining up speakers? Should we be having picketers? Should we have media? I'm not hearing a lot of support for that kind of approach. So it's working to get the minimum site conditions up so that we don't have to flunk buildings, so that we can just rate them and encourage them. And I think but I know it's a frustrating process. And I know we spent a lot of time on SPRCs, and I know I said that there weren't any more SPRCs lined up after River House. But in fact, in the last few weeks, they just posted 9 more. So there were 0. And now they're all in the preliminary stage. They haven't come to the active stage yet, so I'm not going to assign people to them, but we will be looking to do this again. And I think, Susan, you were explaining that was just sort of
There are a couple of things going on there. One is like the timeline of staff and all the feet paddling below the surface to get the expiring site plans that were set to expire at the end of the fiscal year. That was a lot of work. And that got us very busy June schedule and then some of the July ones moving forward. The other thing though that's happened is that the manager directed at the board's encouragement, directed CPHD to post as soon as things come in the door. They used to wait until it was perfected and paid for and everything else. And that was one of the pain points that kind of gives people the what do you hiding kind of feeling. So so there are more posted in preliminary stage and they'll be in preliminary longer than you used to because we're trying to open that.
That is great background to have. And to Kim's point, hearing that it's a lot harder to get projects off the ground. So I'm not assigning people to these preliminary projects yet. But they will become active. But, we were working so on SPRCs and thinking, well, they're going to fall off a cliff and we'll have like this big hiatus. But now I don't know that we will. Hopefully we won't.
River House has 4 more buildings that haven't even entered the SPRS.
I was wondering if they were doing them all separate. That project is so huge.
That's your whole time on.
Yeah. Die on it.
So, all right, I think, but anyway, back to saying, I know it can be a very frustrating process. If we feel like we're not making a difference, but I think we're hearing from Kim that she's aware of these things, and hearing about C2E2 comments. I think we're hearing from Susan that we got some attention. I think if you watch the hearing of the county board meeting last Tuesday, you'll see a lot of discussion and a lot of concern about what exactly can we do, not just at the late stage in the process, but because if people are meeting the law, the code, the minimum site conditions, at what level can we just say, well, we just don't like it? You know, we want you to do more. I mean, we can do that, but I think it's harder for the county board legally to be able to do that. It's unclear.
And I have a question about that. So I thought the whole thing with site plan is that it's not a by right development.
No, it's
So,
not. It's not like residence.
so are those legally enforceable standards that they can insist upon? I thought they were guidance when you're in a site planning process. So I think ultimately the county does have the power to say no in the site plan process. And the problem is the county hasn't put our issues up at the same level as other issues.
Yeah, we just need to be predictable and consistent and as much as possible, which I'm sure we don't feel predictable and consistent all the time, but so what we couldn't do in this particular one is retroactively say, even though you didn't choose to do the incentive policy, we're going to hold you to the incentive policy. Like that doesn't really make sense. What we could do is have standard site plan conditions for every site plan project that are different than they are today. We also can negotiate the community benefit package. You know, you could in that process have said, forget transportation. It's not as big a deal. Like we only will go forward with this if we do, you know, a completely carbon neutral building. So you could, it's just the way, and this is where the process matters a bit too, because by the time it's gone through all those things, if we at the very last chapter say, actually, we didn't tell you at the beginning, but what we meant to say was this, then nobody in their right mind is going to come back again and do another project. And so we need to fix, you know, we need to get the intent and the procedures to be aligned as early as possible. And I think there's a whole number of things. I'm hearing lots of pieces to that, but that is sort of the bigger umbrella of the green building incentive policy is, and what about the non-incentive, the just baseline? What do we expect? And if that's going to cost money, then what are we going to compromise on, right? In order to actually get a project to move forward this decade.
And that's why I made the point about flunking, because I think we need to make it clear that we're going to be pushing for saying no to these buildings if they just blow off the.
Right, but to the process point, like having that act of these.
No, but if we start making that, if that's public and this becomes clear, there's going to be places in the county pushing to say no to these buildings.
Yeah.
It's not going to be a surprise to developers that in all the trade-off, they can't roll C2E2 concerns because they meet all these other concerns, and the county's always honored those other concerns and blown off what it says in the energy plan.
And again, I think we're hearing they're trying to read the tea leaves today from all of these different pieces, but they're in all these different pieces. And if we can, at least for one point in time, get them a little bit more standardized at the beginning, then we might make some exceptions. Sometimes there are, I mean, I think it was interesting. Penzance had 2 projects, right? And I think you were talking about, what is it? Red Brick would have said the same thing. Like, it's not that we don't want to do something awesome, and it's not that we didn't think about it and ask the questions and weigh the trade-offs, but on their Ballston project, the environmental trade-offs worked differently than they did on the one Ross, you know, and so it's the same developer, it's the same investors, I think, in those cases, and you make different decisions because of everything that Kim said, all the stacks and all the different. So what we need to do is get those priorities in as early as possible, as crisply as possible, but particularly for newer play actors in the, you know, that don't have as many intuitive reps to drive decision making, and so that you can see it earlier and say, whoops, this one is headed towards, you know, flunking, and is that what you mean to be doing way back 2 years earlier before it's, you know, right.
And expect sustainability, getting to carbon neutral building requires that's your getting the design stage.
Right. I mean, that,
and that is, we keep telling it's like, oh, well, you know, we haven't figured that out yet. We're not that far along in the design stage. And yet everybody we've talked about that builds to these standards says that's our goal from the day one as we're conceptualizing it. So, you know, somehow having it, that's our goal. And that, you know, I like the idea of, you know, what are the incentives? You know, how do we, you know, we incentivize getting and design here. How do we incentivize getting, you know, the housing that we want built to the standards that we want?
And said, that's our goal for Arlington, is to be carbon neutral and as sustainable as possible. And, how do we work to make sure that, everybody's on board?
So I see that John Bloom has noted the site plan conditions were last updated in 2022. So the word update could mean anything. But Lily, were you trying to say
Yeah,
something?
I was gonna ask Susan if it would help writing to the board saying that we would like to see that site user change. And this is our recommendation, and could we start a dialogue?
Yeah, I think so. And the dialogue's actually already started, and we were pinging each other during the meeting too. So, yes, I think that would be helpful. And I think that the umbrella of GBIP, the next 3 months, and the kind of two-way conversations that are happening, and what are we going to do with all of that at the end? So it's a good time this fall, I think.
Okay, so we can look for volunteers to work on that. We're going to really struggle to get to our legislative priority discussion. But I think we should, since our next meeting, I think is September 29th, and legislative priorities are due the last day is September 30th. So we're going to have discussions online between now and then. But I'd at least, I have Elizabeth's top 3 on my phone. Which were to create an energy czar position at the Virginia state government level. And then to strengthen the BCEA with binding targets for utilities, because Dominion is whiffing on the IRP, and it doesn't seem like the SEC has the tools to push back. There's something around Dominion. And third is to create incentives for B2G. Oh, okay, right. So those are 3 that I don't think any of those were in our letter last year. I sent around a letter talking about benchmarking, which just seems like low-hanging fruit. We should, it's something that benchmarking, having buildings compare their energy usage to themselves, to other buildings and so on. That just seems to be something that works without stretch building codes or getting Virginia to, cough up some power to municipalities under the Dillon rule, or, wanting to, it doesn't cost money, not much money, somebody has to look at it, somebody has to make a website to publish it. But we are going to, so I threw that out there. I think Reggie, rejoining Reggie is certainly important.
And do you have a question,
Henry, what are your top 3?
You can go ahead and finish, Cindy. I didn't mean to cut you off. I was just going to offer one thing that I was thinking about as I was reading last year's priorities was there doesn't really seem to be an avenue for like building or like putting resources toward building more consensus and awareness among Virginians across the state and obviously at the county level. I know, Jen, you just hired somebody to help with the communications at the county level, and I think that's really important. I'm not sure what that would look like as a legislative action, but to the extent we could, push for more robust communication of the importance of climate action from the state level as a legislative priority, and then getting that message out as to like why amongst the population, but also like with other special interest groups and other other interested parties. For example, tribal governments in Virginia, they have significant equities obviously in this too, and quite frankly, I don't think there has been in my time listening in on these meetings or sitting in on some of these conversations, I don't think I've heard anything about any of our level of government engagement with tribal partners. So to the extent that that could be, I'm not sure what that looks like again as a legislative priority. I just know that I didn't see any of that in the draft. So just wanted to raise it if there was some interest in thinking more about it. But I'd personally love to see more of that, because I feel like that's where some of the change can, some of the other changes that we want to make can be made easier. Thanks.
Thanks, Henry. Joe?
Yeah, going along, like thinking outside the box. So there's corporate climate disclosure laws for both climate risks and greenhouse gas emissions that have been adopted in California. They're currently going through some legal battles, but at least a lot of the arguments have been thrown out thus far. Other states have introduced the same legislation. It's quite standardized. A lot of the industry groups are pushing it across the different state legislators. Hasn't made it very far in many states, mostly because of time constraints, just basic legislative stuff. But it's kind of critical that states follow suit. And it's not just California doing it, because if more states do it, it becomes a national standard rather than just a state that some people could try to ignore and take a small fine for. And for Arlington, that has many large publicly traded companies in the county, and that we rely on data centers all nearby, and it poses a lot of climate risks. It would be forcing all of these entities around us that have an impact on us to disclose their climate risks and their impact on the environment. I think that was actually.
Right, and I think that Lily and Henry wrote about corporate climate disclosure rules, but not the California one, to you. So to put that, as you work with the Corporate Climate Leaders Program, to put that on. That's a great one. Kevin?
I don't know if I just could say this because it's a conflict because of my company would benefit, but I would definitely think that ACC2 needs to be reinstated. It should be legislative priority, which is the California Advanced Clean Cars 2, which is the ZEB mandate, which Virginia adopted and then one can revoke. Virginia legislature as a compromise ruled on and agreed to drop. They actually had a pretty good lawsuit they could pursue. The didn't have authority to revoke it, but they gave up on it in order to compromise some other stuff. And if the legislature flips, it would be a smart idea to reinstate what Virginia had done before, which was institute a set mandate.
But if Governor Youngkin revoked it, couldn't a Democratic governor reinstate it the first day?
I think it depends on how it was, what action took.
There's a lot of things in
Plus Trump's trying to get rid of that standard.
Right.
it needs to be on the list, how it actually gets implemented. There's lots of
We can
different
figure
ways.
that.
In addition, it's actually in federal court right now. There's a good chance that Californians won't even be able to survive because Trump actually revoked
Right.
authority for it. But
Right.
assuming
It's
California
world.
prevails in their litigation, Virginia would be regional.
Katie, do you have?
These are, no, I mean, this.
I mean, I think when I was reading through the legislative document, one thing I feel like I would love to see a lot more of, but at the same time, this is also covered by other commissions, is funding for public transportation.
Yes, that was one of my top 3.
Oh, really? Okay, great.
It's in our last year letter, but it needs to be flown. If we can
So-
only narrow it to 3.
That's something I think is really important. But other than that, like people are coming from lots of great topics.
I would do more incentives for like refurbishment and brownfield sites. I think that could just be done.
I think that Virginia can benefit a lot from tilting the balance towards solar at the point when nobody is, basically, and empowering consumers to become consumers. And so there is a pilot that Elizabeth is talking about, the virtual
Right.
power plant. We
Right.
should put a package on solar and measures of solar that are for the entire state. And I started doing it when I finished. I'll send it over.
Okay, great. John?
Yeah, I think, well, one of the strategy is, if we get too down in the weeds on recommending things, then, we kind of narrow, we've always taken the strategy of kind of having big bucket things, but suggest potential legislation that addresses that. So one clear is the building codes, whether it's stretch codes. I think, the benchmarking, of all of those, benchmarking is probably the most powerful in the long term because it does give the potential at some point to start actually, charging and taxing for carbon emissions from buildings if you don't meet certain standards, or that's what, as they're doing like in New York and several other states. But just having the ability to do stretch codes just after having, energy codes up to national standards would all help because, we'd have to worry a lot less about
Right.
some of these things.
That's
That's
green.
kind of one big bucket. And then I think the bucket on the shift to renewable energy, zero carbon, again, that strongly gets into dealing with the grid. And I think my third would be transportation, and there, just to frank, can we get to a 50-50 split between highway funding and public transit funding at the state level? And if I had a fourth one of that, it is the extended producer responsibility to get producers to pay for the trash.
Right, I don't know that we can do that just at.
Pardon?
I think that one is a hard one.
Yeah, I don't think we can do that.
They've got several states that have passed them, so, so we can all strength.
Okay, is there anybody else on? No. Other commissioner?
May I just amend with the energy, we talked about energy code specifically, but I think we should talk about building code generally. Climate risks, we're talking about more than just energy.
So
Building code's been our number one request.
right, but
3
it's,
years ago.
Yeah, but we specifically say energy codes throughout this instead of anything about regular building.
Big climate resilient.
aren't our hands tied?
They have state legislation. But that's what.
Right, right. Yeah, well, we'll have to pick our top three. So,
Joe's gonna circulate this California legislation or some link, or just a link to it or something. Just so we can go read a little bit more about it.
Oh, yeah, if you want to.
okay, so I think we'll have to narrow these down by email. So, but I am looking for volunteers to work on this. I talked to Rob, who's on vacation and was on the line, but had to go into with his family. So, but I'm definitely looking for people who are interested in working on the legislative letter. So let me know. And,
Hey, Cindy, I'm interested. I'll just let you know right now.
okay, thanks, Henry. Well, I'm going to Ireland tomorrow, so I will not be sending out an email asking everybody for their top three. But when I get back, I will. So think about it. Because, we had this big complaint. Joan was the lead on our letter last year and I worked with her on it. We got it down from the original 50 suggestions. We got it down to 20. Getting it down to 3, I see Joan's approach of the big buckets where you put in the bucket and then you put a bunch under it. But to some point, I think we have to pick our top 3, within limits. So think about it and we'll figure this out. All right. Thanks, everybody. Thank you to our special guest, Kim. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
And also
Bye,
to
guys.
our very special guest, Susan. Thank you.